Welcome to our Farm Life podcast. I'm Justine Ball, a partner in the Real Estate Disputes team in Birmingham, and I specialise in telecommunications law. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Cheesbrough and Tom Parrish from Art Partners. And in today's podcast, we'll be looking at telecoms agreements and providing some helpful insights into what steps you can take to make the most out of your agreement. For farmers and rural landowners, telecoms masts have been a source of additional income for decades, but these agreements have not been without their headaches. And for some, the new telecoms code has made the agreements feel even more complicated to navigate. But hopefully today we can help to ease some of that pain and demystify some of the common misconceptions about telecoms agreements. So, introductions. My name's Justine Ball. I'm a partner in the Real Estate Disputes team in Birmingham at Shakespeare, Martineau. I have a particular specialism in the telecoms arena and help all types of landowners renew telecoms leases, enter into new arrangements and seek vacant possession of their land. I'm also joined by two specialist property consultants in the telecom sphere from Art Partners, Andrew Cheesbrough and Tom Parrish.
Hi, I'm Andrew Cheesbrough of Art Partners, Associate Surveyor, 22 years in the telecom industry, 20 years on the operator side before moving over to the landlord side. I specialise in project management of vacant possession and lift and shift work.
My name's Tom Parrish. Thank you, Justine, for your introduction. I'm the Managing Director at Art Partners. I work closely with Andrew. We deal with a lot of matters relating to code. Just a bit about my background. I've been in the property and telecommunications industry for near on 25 years. I'm a qualified chartered surveyor. My specialism is telecoms and landlord and tenant, and we cover everything in between. Art Partners is essentially a London-based firm, although we have now branched into Northamptonshire, where I'm speaking from today, and we provide advice to land and property owners, farmers, property companies, all manner of clients requiring advice on telecommunications.
Okay, thank you both. So just before we start, I'd like to get across a few points on how the online session will work. So on your screen, you'll see a Q&A icon. So please do use this to ask us questions. We will respond to all of your questions directly and after the session. So feel free to start asking straight away. So let's get started. Our first topic will be the prime issue anyone ever talks about when a landowner is thinking about renewing a telecoms agreement, and that is, how much am I going to get? So Andrew, what do you think?
So the mechanism has changed. Prior to December 2017, when the new code came into effect, deals were completed at arm's length transaction, where sites were gauged on their location and amount of equipment and comparative evidence. But under the new code, rents are valued under a no scheme valuation. So this means that unlike the old code, where the worth to the operator was taken into consideration, equipment, previous evidence, so it's largely ignored, and rents are valued on their square foot value without any equipment being present. Value can be added if the site has an alternate use, such as storage or other business interest. Otherwise, the value is relatively low. The operator will therefore increase their figure via the forms of compensation or the rights of access and for agreeing a consensual deal. But the values have vastly changed in comparison to what they were previously.
Yes, I do agree. There's been a lot of movement recently, both in terms of the case law from the tribunals, and there's recently been a new bill. I read that yesterday, in the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Bill, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it appears that there isn't going to be that much of a difference in rent now, in terms of if you have a 54-hour lease or if you have a code lease, which is what we thought may have been the case before. And essentially in all areas, the rent is in fact reducing, which is not the best news that we want to deliver. But in that case, what can shrewd landowners do to try and make up for this reduction in rent? So one of the key tips we have for you today is to check the rent review provisions in your lease. We're finding that many of our landowner clients have been collecting the rent from operators without much fuss for years, and that sum has not changed. So throughout the whole 10 and 20 years that you've had your lease, you've been collecting the rent, and not at any point has the rent been reviewed upwards. So that's the one thing we need to check. how much rent could you get from your operator tenants? And that's not just rent for the last 1 or 2 years, it could be rent for the last 10 years. So you could be owed quite a sum that you didn't know about. So often rent reviews will be available every third or fifth year of the term, and the new rent would be paid from that backdated date. So hence the amount of back rent that you could be owed. So the amount of rent that would be due to you will depend on what's in your agreement. So that's the first place we need to start. Andrew, what sort of rent reviews are you seeing in telecoms agreements at the moment?
Well, they vary between obviously new code agreements and old code agreements. So in a new code agreement, we're seeing CPI or RPI, and historically we tend to see RPI and OMV, or the greater of the two. With regards to pre-2018 leases, we've seen many reviews missed, and in these situations, we can review and look at the uplift in rent value. In the case of RPI, this is relatively simple. However, the situation with regards to OMV only reviews, we need to negotiate on an open market value with the operator to agree a sum. For the period before 2018, the value was easy to agree, but the reviews from 2020 onwards are proving harder because the number of transactions have reduced and we can only use comparable evidence within a certain time frame. For comparable evidence to be used, we have to use evidence with similar sites and locations and the same level of equipment right. We also have to bear in mind that once the review is agreed, we can only claim back a certain number of years of that as well. So they have to be taken into consideration. So if you have an historic rent review, then it's likely that we have the comparable evidence. If it's a relatively new review, say 2020 onwards, then the evidence is harder to find. We're seeing less chance of an uplift on those values. But historically, we still do get good amount of back rent where reviews have been missed.
Excellent, thank you, Andrew. So if you move slightly on to our next topic, what to do if you are approached by an operator to share or upgrade existing equipment on your site. So this very important tip: do not agree for the operator to come onto your site until you've got advice. Pass it on to your advisor, and your advisor will seek the assistance of a telecoms specialist to help you out. So please don't sign any paperwork and don't feel threatened by what's in the letters or the approaches, because what we can do is we can review your agreement, we can have a look at the terms of that agreement, we'll need to request plans from the operators, risk and method statements and other details, so we can assess their request in a lot of detail. There are provisions in the code which allow an operator to upgrade and share equipment. There's no doubt about that. But the starting point is your telecoms agreement. So we need to understand the rights and obligations in that agreement first. And what we can do is we can help you control that process from start to finish, rather than let the operators take control and you feel that you're on the back foot. So first and foremost, do not permit an operator to come onto your land without first seeking advice. Tom, would you agree with that?
Yes, most certainly. I think obviously where we are with obviously with sharing and upgrading, obviously we have to consider the agreement in context. We also have to think about where the operators are in terms of their network rollout and deployment, and implementing 5G. And certainly over the last few years, it's sort of been very much sort of the cart before the horse. So back to the drawing board is our advice to all clients: look at the agreement that you have in place. How long has that agreement been in place? When is it due to expire? Now, if it's a 54 Act tenancy, and a renewal has not been enacted, the landlord is in quite a strong position, and that shouldn't be forgotten. There is greater emphasis on 54 Act tenancies for the operators to obtain consents from you, the landlord. And in doing so, where consent is required, there's often value to be had. That value will likely manifest itself by way of a premium, where consent cannot be unreasonably withheld. But there is certainly opportunity for landlords to extract some level of value. Each agreement is a case in point, of course, to extract value, to extract professional fees, and to certainly have a steer over the proposed upgrade which the operator is seeking to implement. This is in marked contrast to what we call a code agreement, which is obviously those agreements post late December 2017, where the code provides almost carte blanche rights under what's called Para 17 of the code, which enables those operators to freely have a free hand in upgrading and site sharing. This is unlike pre-2017 landlord and tenant tenancy agreements. So really, my advice to all clients, all landlords, is to consider the agreement you have. And if you've got a tenancy which is still running and hasn't been renewed, then there is scope not just to extract value from the upgrade, but also possibly to defer that period that you are currently receiving in terms of enjoying what's called a post-code rent, i.e., a pre-code rent before the legislation changed in late 2017. So what to do when you are approached with regards to your agreement? Do not accept or agree to any of the terms put forward to you by one of the mobile network operator agents. Carefully consider your agreement. Carefully consider what you've got. Carefully consider when your agreement expires and the type of agreement that you have, because there's nothing compelling you to agree anything quickly. You've got time. You've got a minimum period of 6 months. And in the instances where you've got a 54 Act tenancy, there is every ground to suspect that there will be a deferred period and a longer period, because the law remains grey in this area, over the extensions on 54 Act tenancies. So there is no immediate hurry to rush to renew your agreement. And in doing that, you would forsake the rent that you're currently enjoying. Equally, if you have, and as has been the case, where leases have expired and rent has continued to be paid, there is an argument to say that a protected tenancy or an implied tenancy exists, which has 54 Act protection, which could equally postpone or defer the inevitability, which is code in maybe 6 months or 12 months down the line. If, however, you have an expired agreement, which was a contracted out lease, and you have received communications from a network operator, then the first point, as with all the others, is to take immediate professional advice. There is a danger that if you seek to ignore the letters that are coming through from an operator with regards to opening a communication for a consensual agreement, and you choose to ignore those letters, you could find yourself at the sharp end of litigation with the mobile network operators. And this is the last place that any landlord should be in, really down to the fact that it could be a substantially expensive litigation, which would be disproportionate to the amount that you would otherwise receive from your telecoms. We would always advocate a level of communication with the mobile network operators, particularly if you receive what's called a Para 33 notice under the code, or a Para 26 notice under the or Section 26 notice under the Landlord and Tenant Act. That is the point to seek professional advice.
Thank you, Tom. So in a nutshell, do not just accept the first offer or proposal. It's usually a bog standard letter that agents and operators will just circulate in mass. So do not feel that you have to be pressured to accept those proposals or sign on any dotted line. Just pass it to your advisors or any other persons that you speak to in relation to your properties, and they can seek the necessary help. Because what we can do with you is have an understanding as to your intentions. Do you want to redevelop? Do you want to diversify into another area? Actually, what kind of rent are you talking about here? Even if you're not redeveloping, what other benefits could you obtain here? Could we get a premium? Could we get a break right in there? If you've got redevelopment plans, how can we ensure that your rights are protected as far as possible? Or it might be you have a quirky access to your mast and the apparator. So how can we ensure that maintenance is protected? Or if you want an alternative access, how we can work that in. So it's not a one size fits all. You should not at all feel pressured to enter into anything from the first correspondence. You shouldn't either ignore it, but instead just pass it on to your trusted advisor, and hopefully they can then seek the help from the right person. So that covers sort of the three main topics that we wanted to talk to you about today. But I see that we have had quite a few questions in, so thank you for those. So I'll kick off if that's okay. I've seen here we've got a farmer based in Oxfordshire, and they've been considering entering into a new telecoms arrangement as an additional source of income and to diversify. So what are the key things I should be thinking about, and is this a good idea? Well, that is a fantastic question. Thanks for asking it. But I think one we could spend a webinar in itself talking about. But I think the key issues you will need to consider are maybe firstly, thinking about what your intentions are for that parcel of land for the medium to long term. Would you be happy for a mast or other apparatus to be in situ for 10 years? I say that because it's very difficult to terminate a telecoms agreement once you've signed on the dotted line, and you have to prove specific grounds to get rid of them, and that's usually redevelopment. So it may be if you don't have any intention to redevelop in the medium to long term, you could think about it further. And then, as I sort of alluded to before, access arrangements is also very key. It's not just the parcel of land that the operator sits on, it's how will the operators access and egress? How will they maintain, repair and upgrade if they need to bring in machinery to do that? Do you have the right access for this? Are you happy for them to come on your land in this way? What access route can you give them? Again, thinking about the lay of the land and how that can work for you. Another thing is rental sums. So the amount that you would have previously got from an operator will not be the same as to what you get now. But there are choices and options out there. And I know Andrew and Tom could talk about this for a while as well. It could be that you could get 2,000 to 3,000 to 4,000 for a shorter term arrangement per mobile operator. But it could be that there's an option for a 35-year lease to an infrastructure company, and you could get a premium of a lot more, potentially 100,000. I'm not going to go into value because that's more these guys' job and not mine. So, but there's a lot to consider there in terms of the format of that agreement. So again, it's seeking some advice. So before you think about launching into this, or if you've received an approach and you think actually this is a good way to make a bit of money, speak to your advisor about this, and they can go through all of these points with you, and we can try and find a tailor-made solution that works for you. Anything that you'd want to add to that, Andrew or Tom, or should we move on to the next question?
If this is my cue to say something about disposal, then I'll take it. If you're looking at, you've been approached, the scenario is that you've been approached by the mobile network operator, and you are being offered, I won't say a pitiful sum, but a rent proposal which is considerably lower than what you're used to. We're not going to get too drawn in on sums today, but there is an option for landlord which is certainly gaining traction in the market, and where you have ideally where you have a mast on a piece of land, ideally on the curtilage, on the edge of a field, there is an opportunity there to extract best value. There will always be some value if born out of the presence of a mobile network operator operating your land for transmission purposes, but it's going to be lowly. And there is a growing investment market for mast sites. And what we are seeing quite a lot of activity with new entrants coming into the sector. And these entrants are sort of in terms of profile, are hedge funds, infrastructure companies who are owners of thousands of sites, both in the UK and internationally, and they are looking to buy network infrastructure, certainly the ground rent rights to network infrastructure. And like anything, where there is a market presence, values are being driven in the right way. And how this would manifest? So if you were to have a corner, a field which is let to a mast operator, that agreement is set to expire, or possibly could have expired already. There still remains an opportunity for you to capitalise on that, on the disposal wagon, so to speak. And how these mast sites are valued for the purposes of disposal, it's taking the existing or the current rent, that's the pre-code rent, and applying an attractive multiplier to that. It's almost like the investor will come in as a sort of intermediate and take a long-term lease with the mast operator on a long-term basis, probably typically 25 to 35 years commonly. And in doing so, an attractive premium would be, or should I say that the level of premium that one might expect would be an attractive multiple of the current rent. So for example, if you had a £5,000 rent passing, you could potentially you could on what may be soon to be an expired agreement, that could be presented as a £50,000 lump sum or more if staggered over a period of time. So there's clearly an opportunity to be had, and £1 a day is worth a pound more than £1 for tomorrow. So there's a clear opportunity to realise some value from the sale of telecoms, and this is certainly a strong current trend, and where we're getting a lot of inquiries from clients. So if you'd like a conversation about this, myself or any member of the team would be obviously very delighted to have that chat with you.
Yeah, no, that's great, Tom. Thank you. So that's even an extended answer to that question in terms of the other options in terms of disposal of land. It's not just agreeing leases with operators. It could be a disposal of part of that land for a premium. So no, thank you for that. Andrew, I think I can see a question on planning, which is definitely more you than me. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so just wanted to go on to changes that are coming through soon and likely to be approved. So it's not only has the government decided to give the operators the code agreements to give them more rights on that front, planning changes are also giving them greater rights as well. So we just basically need to be careful of what we do, because what's currently in situ or what they have planning for on a new code agreement is not necessarily what they're going to have at the end of the term. So the operators have got greater freedom to extend their existing masts and apply for taller masts under a GPDO or a general permitted development right. Changes that are currently proposed are likely to be approved mean that the operator will be able to apply for a 25-metre mast under a GPDO, which basically means that the only way for that not to be approved is if they disagree with the siting of the mast or the appearance of the mast. So it's only on those two points. Also, existing masts, which are as little as 10 metres, can be increased to 20 metres under a 28-day notice, which is known normally as a Reg 5 or a licence notification, an LN. This doesn't apply, obviously, in SSI areas or conservation areas where they will still need to go down the full planning route. There are also other changes because of the height increases. The rights that are being proposed will also give them rights to increase the width of the mast. So currently there's a 1/3 rule, which means that anything over that, you'd need to apply for planning again. But that looks like that's also going to be increased so that they can have a 50% increase on the original width of the mast if it's an upgrade of a mast. So what this means for landlords is we have to be mindful of what we allow the operators to do and restricting it if we can, and have a mind that what's there today could be different tomorrow. we're seeing incidents where they are not necessarily on farmland, but on other land, they are going for sites to get through planning, so lower height, deploying the mast, and then coming back later on to increase it quite significantly. And if you haven't got certain clauses in place, that's quite easy for them to do. Historically, under old leases, not an awful lot of them had restricted rights on the overall height. So we just have to have a mind of what planning rights the operators now have as well.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Well, I think that's our time up for now, and brings us to an end of our discussion. We could have went on for hours, I think, on some of those questions, but we'll spare you that. But if you have any other questions, please do send them in, and we will be answering all of them. Thank you very much for listening today. We do hope you found it useful. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and if you like what you've heard, please do leave us a review. Thank you.